The world we live in measures success by numbers, profits, returns, followers. In many ways, it still echoes that line from the 1987 film Wall Street. Greed is good. Move fast, scale quickly, maximize the return. But along the way, it's easy, in fact, almost inevitable, to minimize something else. People, relationships, the very things that actually hold a life together. But what if we've been measuring success all wrong? What if the real return isn't found in what you build, but in who you invest in? Tonight we'll talk with a businessman who says, in the end, the main thing is people. My guest tonight is the relaxed, smiling founder of 2R Consulting, and I'll let him tell you where that name comes from. You'll rarely see him in a suit unless it's a wedding or a trip to the White House. And his philosophy of working comfortably and treating others with kindness is perfectly captured by his footwear of choice, flip-flops. 2R Consulting helps business owners understand where they're headed financially, and if they're successful, frees them up to serve customers and do what they love. Brandon is many things, including an author. We'll get to his book a little later. But first, Brandon, take us back a bit before the success, before the company, who you were as a young man, and when did God become real in your life?
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the show, Joe. I appreciate it. I'll tell you, I didn't grow up with Jesus, and that was part of my story, but very precocious in a house full of sisters, and very grateful for that upbringing. So I'm from Delaware originally, and we moved around a little bit, ended up in Pennsylvania. But my life, again, just sort of maybe a little bit effeminate growing up, lots of dolls, and I was a twin of a girl, and so it was my lot in life. And so always sort of looking for my why, very creative, and still sort of trying to figure out that juxtaposition between loving the art and the world of people and relationships and then numbers. And that honestly just continued to grow from there.
Wow. Yeah. So numbers, so you did well in school?
I did. And so I'll just, for those that know me, I barely made it through the third grade. I struggled. And then a lot changed for me in fourth grade. I had a wonderful teacher. My mind started to catch up. Maybe it was a little slow, going in the first 8 years, but yes, school became pretty easy and numbers became a bit of a language for me.
Yeah. Wow. So take us from there.
Yeah, so I started, and we'll get to the book and a lot of the inspiration behind that. Around fourth grade, I started to recognize things were easy, memory was easy, numbers made sense. And around then, and again, had a wonderful twin sister, Heather, who was a bit of our forward thinker. And she was the one that led us. She was the leader, and I was good with that. But through middle school, we had roles, and being a boy that was a brother of a girl that led the way, sometimes was like, hey, are you going to step up? And so I had to become athletic and do sports. But it was funny because in the same vein of playing soccer or baseball, it was being in a musical and doing plays. And in 1994 and 1993, this was a little like, it doesn't happen all the time. And for me, part of that was a part of my identity. I liked straddling the fence in both worlds, and I loved being in there. And it was that separation was something I embraced. I loved, and to this day, still love maybe the disenfranchised thought or the rare, or and my sandals and flip-flops say it all the time, nonconformist. And that's not for the sake of nonconformity or being nonconformist, but it's about being comfortable in who you are. And I think this is embracing that. I did wear a jacket for your show, but had no intention of doing that, But one of the things I think about as I grew up and found Jesus at 15, it was a time, right after my parents divorced, and I left home, and there was a lot of just difficulty there.
You went to boarding school?
So I left home. My parents still lived in Pennsylvania at the time, and I moved back to Maryland with friends, and that was it.
Wow.
I left home, and so I actually rekindled a relationship with a friend from Maryland that I lived with originally for the first time in almost 30 years. That was just a couple months ago, all stemming from this book. And I just feel like God lifted. And I hope 30 minutes covers this whole thing, Joe, because I've got lots to share here. But that leaving Maryland or leaving Pennsylvania to go to Maryland was how God placed me into a place of just utter reliance. I had no more answers. I wasn't sure how to move into my own sense of self and security. So God just swept me up. And that sophomore year of high school, it was like everything switched from there. And I was still, mind you, just living with friends. And I did throughout the rest of my high school career.
Wow. So did you go to college?
I did. So I got a scholarship to go. I went right up the road to Lehigh University, did my undergraduate there, and originally started, my grandfather said, your affinity for numbers, Brandon, you really need to be an engineer. And I thought, this is brilliant. I'll be an architectural. That seems a little arty. And I can marry the two, science and art. And then I spent a half a semester and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm nothing like a typical engineer. So I transferred to the business school. And in that time, my grandfather, who was very pivotal in my role as my grandmother was, he said, you have to pick up a good major in the business school. I said, what's a good major? He said, you're going to be an accountant. And I said, okay, I don't know what that is. And at the time I didn't. And then a year into that, he said, Brandon, you have too much time on your hands. You got to pick up another degree. And I said, okay, not a problem. In my mind, I'm going to be a marketing guy. I wanted to do the art. He said, and not marketing. There was like the right after that thoughts. So he's like, do finance. And that was just the beginning of an education filled with so much opportunity to learn. But I found, and I still talk about it today, there's still a balance of art and science. And finance, for me, has become very much of an artistry. I just published my last article was all about teaching people to paint, and that's what I do with my employees now, make them artists. And then the accounting is a very scientific, process. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So how do you get into business from there? Obviously, you have a business background
Yes.
and majors and the like, but
Yes.
then getting into business, and now you run a consulting firm.
Yes.
So you're the CEO
Yes.
and everything else.
Yep.
But how, so you finished Lehigh.
Yep. So I finished Lehigh. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went right out of Lehigh and said, I want to be a bartender. And I started my grad degree in English. I wanted education, and I struggled from then to fit. And that was something I carried with me my whole life. So it was like, hey, go and get a job and do this corporate role. And I wasn't quite ready, although after a year and a half or so, JP Morgan picked me up and said, hey, we really want you to do some accounting. And that was great for like 8 weeks. And then they said, hey, we've noticed some aptitude doing some more finance specific things. We have this thing called derivative collateral, which in 2004, nobody had heard of, specifically me. And then they shipped me to London. I was there for a few months, migrated this whole derivative collateral desk over from London to New York. And that was the haphazard, completely unplanned way of falling into this incredible career with opportunities that most can't, pay for. And that for me was sort of the beginning of where God said, all right, I really need you to pay attention. You're going to do well. We're going to make some good money. You can be in New York, but how do you feel? Are you full? Do you feel like you're giving? And that for me was the beginning of what I think was the transition, albeit, a decade long. That was the moment I realized where this is not going to be my life. I am not to work for someone else. I am not meant to do this. And I need to incorporate my faith here. How do I do that? What does that look like? And lots of, U-turns and some pivots there and course corrections clearly, but it was painful and still awesome at the same time.
Amazing that you didn't get completely seduced, as so many people do. I mean, you go to Wall Street and there's lots of money to be made, and there are lots of people making good incomes there, and bonuses and the like, and the salaries. It can be a very, very good life. It's easy to be seduced, by the things, by the money, by the wealth that some people flaunt.
Sure.
And you're a Christian guy.
Yep.
You're a follower of Jesus. Here it is. You're in this industry making all this money, and yet and still you aren't so seduced by it that you say, I'm going to make all the money in the world that I can make, and that's all I want to do is make as much money as I can make, and own all the money in the world.
It's interesting you say that, and I want to be very honest. I was seduced. In fact, I don't know many people that get through a process where they just didn't spend some time in some sort of trance. But this is where I believe faith, and this is where I believe God's plan for your life just takes over. It didn't matter how long I detoured that life. And pushed for money and lusted after popularity and attention. It did not matter. God had a purpose. Whether I was going to do it today or 10 years from now, this is what you're going to do. And ultimately, I was taking an S-curve to a point he still had fixed for my life. So the seduction happened. New York won, corporate America won several times over. But where I am now is my life having a rebuttal to that and saying, I told you it was just a matter of time. And this is where I am now. And honestly, 2R was born out of this desire not to chase money. In fact, I just had a conversation with one of my favorite partners and my personal partner in the business, Dean. And he said he was talking with a new employee of ours who was talking about his own incentive and things that they were working on for how we pay them. And Dean said, well, this gentleman, Zach, said, I talked to Brandon, and he's like, well, Dean said, Brandon's going to be happy with whatever because he doesn't care about money. And that couldn't be more true now. It's funny to look at myself 20 years ago and think how much it dictated my why. Now, the very thought that he can say something like that tells me I'm at least paying attention to the thing and not paying attention to this thing. So the seduction has moved away, at least in that front. And now I'm trying to throw my heart here.
Yeah. Tell everybody what the R's stand for.
Yeah. So the 2R is risk and return. So, and it is a double entendre because Rogers is my last name.
Yeah.
And actually the company was born with my father, Bill. So we've had some back and forth, and it's been a little bit of a journey for us. But I must say, his leadership in my life early on, regardless of where it sits now, was part of how I stayed into business. It was a lot of his mentorship and a lot of his encouragement. So that was also a part of, I think about him. And every time I think of that, while risk and reward makes a lot of sense, I think about the Rogers and what that name means, and what I want it to mean to others.
Yeah. So how did you come to form your consulting firm? Because your consulting firm is not at all about, making money and, and defining success by the human metrics.
Yeah. So I think this is where God just gets very creative and says, if you're not going to do this with me, I'm going to do this for you. I had to divorce myself of this concept of provision, taking care of myself and taking care and worrying about family. And so as we built, I remember saying to God, it was January, my grandmother had just passed, the most important person that has ever walked the face of this earth in my lifetime was my gram. And that January she passed. After 84 years living well, she passed. And I remember, goodness, it was probably 2 weeks later, I just broke down and said, she lived an incredible life and she was all about all the important things. She was a perfect mentor to me. And she was who Jesus is in the flesh for me in this life. So I told myself, and then eventually my wife, this has to mean something. All I want to do is be able to take care of our needs, and I want to love what I do. If I love what I do, people are going to love what they do. And that was it. My grandmother said, if it blesses one, it will bless the whole. If God says this is going to bless one, everyone around you are going to be blessed as well. And I thought, okay, if that's a little bit true, it's got to be true. It's like the associative properties of math. It has to be true for everything else. And so I began to take that to heart. And every day I worked and enjoyed myself, I found that there was more validation. Like, hey, we love this work. One person became 2, one client became 4. I mean, and everything in this business for the last 4+ years has been referral. We've not paid for a single partner. I made a couple phone calls March of 2022. It's the last time I did any business development. And I'm grateful. I know God is stewarding that. And just recently, I had to walk back a couple decisions because in my heart, they were a bit about money. And they were a bit about what I thought could enrich. And I put it as a rationalization. This is good for the business. This is good for our employees. It was good for what I thought about security. And God said, nope. If you're going to be honest about what I am doing for you, forget about the control. You can lie to other people, but you're not going to lie to yourself. And sure as I sat here, there was pain even from this fall that just went away the day that I made the decision just a couple months ago to walk it all back. And now we've course corrected and we're on a path to continue with our current clients. And everybody, I can see it just waft over our people, our partners. They just feel better. So God has a way of pushing us to the right spot, sometimes kicking and screaming. But for me, he always lets me know in a nice physical sensation, you're on the right path.
Yeah. had an Instagram post about a year and change ago or so that was very moving. You talked about you had a fall, and physically a fall right before Christmas,
Yeah.
and that on black ice,
Yeah.
and what it meant to you, how God had used that.
Yeah, it's funny as I think back. It is a very vulnerable place to be. It was December of 2024. I like to drive. I like to be in a position where I can affect change, and it flattened me. Where I needed the people that I had been, shaping and mentoring for the last 3 years.
You were just walking.
I was just walking. It was as innocuous as seeing a bird fly through your line of sight. I mean, it was only in this 3 foot diameter, small little divot, and an entire parking lot, nowhere. And as I slipped, my feet came from under me. I landed on my head, and it was just dark after that. And I remember when I woke up, there was a bit of static, and there was that static for a couple of months where I couldn't form the numbers. They didn't move well. I couldn't think through the sentences properly, and I stuttered for 2 months. I mean, I was giving speeches and going and speaking to certain clients, and I had to let it all go. I mean, I had to be as broken. I was physically broken, and I had to rely on Alyssa at the time was my assistant, and Dean and Beth and Zach and Casey, all of these brilliant employees of mine that really became partners. And then my wife, where she just kind of nursed me back and said, you have to rely on, this faith in us that not only are you going to get through it, but you'll be better for this. And every time something like that happens, there's a bit of a purge, a reset. And I feel like my mind and my heart shave away just a little bit more of what's not necessary. And again, this year was no different, just kind of evolving and making a shift to need people. And this need for wanting to be in community is no different for me in church than it is for business. And that was a big thing for me. They talk about wanting to have this work-life balance and wanting to be able to be a minister in your workplace. I mean, if I could build something that was ministry in business, what would that look like? And every time, we do not preach, we do not drop words that are Bible-esque, we don't pound people's heads with the Bible. But invariably for the last 4 years, everyone who has faith has asked a question without me having to say something, partners with whom I work. And invariably, every time someone who doesn't know faith has made some sort of connection about, hey, you don't do this, or you think a lot and pivot here, why? And it is just that easy to say, this is what's going on, and be honest with them. I wasn't always this way. I don't know the plans, but there's a certain element of faith here. And that is my purpose. This is why the business is thriving. This is why I believe God continues to push it in front. And that's why I have to be aligned so much, morning walks, morning gym, quiet time with myself, with God.
Yeah. You're a young man to be so prosperous and also to be so wise.
I'll tell you, if wisdom is edified with gray, I feel like I've lived a couple lives, Joe. I'm not kidding. But I will say this, I appreciate that. There's so much pain that comes along with that. And I just had this conversation with someone about the concept of failure and success. I think when you're living in a place where you love God and you feel whole, you appreciate that over here there's a purpose, so you feel supported. And in business, it's easy then to say this, we're always failing. It's just some iteration and degree of failure. And when you arrive at success, you stop. So I have been known not to celebrate the little wins. I have been known to keep pushing. And I just had a conversation with one of my partners today. He said, Brandon, he's like, I don't want to do that work that, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. And my thought, back to him is that, but that's what they need right now. And we can. And that sounds a lot like stories I've read. And so anyway, I feel like it's infiltrating my words without being presumptuous and without being overbearing.
Yeah. As you can see, Brandon Rogers is someone who sees people not as numbers, but as individuals of real worth and value. And now he's out with a brand new book. It's an emotional novel about a man named Tristan confronting a difficult past and finding faith and hope along the way. We'll talk about that book when we come back.
Learn more about Joe Watkins and the mission of this program at joewatkins.net. And tell Joe what you thought about today's program in the comment box.
Welcome back. Brandon Rogers is a husband, a father, a business leader, and now the author of a new book, The Safe Place. If you've experienced trauma or you're looking for hope, this is a story you'll want to read. Brandon, tell us about the book.
Yeah, it's a story. It's an emotional roller coaster. Starts with the protagonist Tristan, and actually highlights this walk home from a long day at the office. Essentially, he's in Manhattan. He's working, on Wall Street, and he begins to have a psychotic breakdown. Just the nervous system breaks down, completely crumbles, and he's on amphetamines. He's up, as they call the trader script in big cities, where you're fed, especially at a young age, fed speed, fed things to bring you up, and then thrown downers to just reset and do it all over. And, after a couple of years of that up and down, your body just gives way. So, Tristan fell, broke down, and then what becomes, the rest of the story of this, and I don't want to give it away because I've enjoyed, watching people respond to this, but there are 3 different time frames that run concurrently throughout the book. And so the storyteller, the story goes that Tristan is in a hospital and that he's preparing to meet a counselor, but he is reflecting on his life backward until the second to last chapter where he's thrown forward, and it shows him a life that he could have. And it all intersects with his faith, the faith that he thought he walked away from, the family he thought disowned him. It is a deep movie, or deep story written thinking about a movie. So the whole time I wrote this, which was one of the reasons why it was so easy to push together, was the words fell out as I love movies. I go once a week, going tonight, to see a movie. It is something that I think if God really said, Brandon, you get to pick now, what do you want to do? I want to go make movies. It's always been my heart. Not quite the face for acting, but I'll take the face for directing and the storytelling. I just love the process. And when I wrote this book, I had a whole screenplay in mind. So as it ran forward and as I thought more about the story, I thought, this is going to have a purpose to change lives. It's going to have to be raw. No fluff, no nothing. So the story really walks through Tristan's life about trauma, really hard, things, making bad decisions, and where he gets to from there and how he moves forward.
Right.
Yeah.
What made you write the book?
It started with counseling. Honestly, my wife and I had been married, not long, maybe a year. And I just recognized that a lot of the things that I was working through needed to be explored. And my counselor at the time, Sean Garrity, wonderful counselor, said to me, Brandon, write. And I always enjoyed writing, and I was a little superfluous. So I was like, am I going to be good at this, or am I just going to write flowery words? And so that first 8 years after my first counseling session, I wrote about four chapters. And I'm big on numbers. And as I mentioned earlier, when you love numbers like I love numbers, English turns into a meter, a syntax. Yeah. So I look at the flow of sentences, staccato, long, and they all have measurement. Every one of them does. So when I put the book out, I just kept to a certain cadence. But yeah, I think as I pushed forward through these words and I continued to roll the thought of inspiring, the words came out, and yeah, now we're here.
Wow,
yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, what a blessing. Wife, and you have kids?
Yep, so my wife Tracy, I've known, it's almost 30 years now. We've been married for almost 17. And Bailey and Henley are 2 girls. Bailey just turned 13. Henley's about to turn 12. And again, it's such a wonderful part of life where I thought I was doing my job. I mean, these books and the second book that comes out in September, it's about my life. And so always I think to myself, I can use that as a proxy, but these girls that are wanting new things from their father, I think, oh goodness, Tristan's gonna, it's inspiring. So I think about where they are now, what they need from their father, different than it was 5 years ago, and certainly different where it's gonna be 5 years from now. So it's a journey, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, what a blessing, what a blessing. Well, I want to thank my friend and brother, my new brother, Brandon Rogers. He leads 2R Consulting, and his book, The Safe Place, is available wherever books are sold online. So you or somebody you know may need to read it. I'll be right back with our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
We're back with our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
So we watched a half-an-hour movie. I mean, you start this journey, a fascinating journey. What I love, though, is that when people reflect on their, especially professional careers, they hit the highlights. Yeah. But it doesn't really give anyone, especially people who are aspiring and particularly ambitious, it doesn't give them anything, any hope. So to know that you can get past, that you can move through, and that God uses all of it, incredible. But to the admission, the sense of the presence of mind, at least, and honesty to be able to say, this is who I was, consumed by money.
Yeah.
And then to watch what God can do with a life to reset priorities so that you literally can be focused on people. It is the Christian life, though. Whether you are a businessman or a homemaker or a teacher, it is all the same thing. It is God over time, very patiently, lovingly, taking away all of the supports so that you're only focused on Him, and then He enables you to be focused on the person in front of you. Yeah. And that was the beauty, I thought, of this conversation you had with Brandon.
Yeah, I loved his honesty when, he said, I was seduced, by all this, but it's amazing what God can do.
Instagram doesn't tell that story. TikTok doesn't tell that story. It doesn't, it is a highlights reel with everything bad cut out, all the flaws adjusted, every angle curated. So what you end up with is a very unattainable life. But if you were to put everything that was on the cutting room floor, put that back in the movie, let people examine that. That's why presidential museums and biographies, statues, graves with all the accolades listed and the accomplishments really don't have any way of helping people who are, I just like some help. I'd just like to know if I keep on this path and pursue, is there a reward at the end? Right. And your Christian faith challenges all of that and says the only path is total surrender.
Yeah. I think this book, The Safe Place, becomes a movie,
I hope it does.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Maybe you've spent your entire working life chasing a dream, and maybe you've achieved it, but there's a good chance that along the way, you traded people and relationships to make it happen. The good news is the gospel speaks directly to that. For those of us who get it wrong, who let lives meant to bless others become consumed by ambition, there is grace, and it's never too late. There's always forgiveness for the humble heart. Thanks to our special guest, Brandon Rogers. Pick up his book and share it with someone who needs it. And if tonight's program encouraged you, take a moment and send me a note at joewatkins.org. I read every message, and I'm grateful for each one. From Philadelphia's capital, from America's first capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. For Jeff Coleman and the entire team here at Lighthouse TV, thanks so much for watching. God willing, we'll see you back here next time. It's great conversation. Great conversation. Maybe I can even get a little bit.
Or maybe you should wear flip-flops.
That's right.